This is My Taste is Better Than Yours, the manga podcast where Guardian Enzo and I, Samu, discuss some of our favourite series and figure out, is my taste better than yours?
Hello again, everybody. It's your old pal Guardian Enzo. And of course, joining me as always for this grand adventure in manga is my co-host, Samu. How are you doing, Samu?
Hello, I'm doing good. Yeah, I'm keen to talk about this one because I've been keeping up with it roughly since it started. However, you're going to do the hosting because I'm sure you'll tell the people, but this is a special one that was decided not by you or me, but by your Patron people.
That's right. So yeah, let's get right to that. So we decided periodically, I think we'll do it again. We were going to do a show where the
Mm.
Lost in Anime patrons voted on what they wanted us to cover, and I gave them several choices. I think 6 or 7, including Yochian Wars and several series that what's the Arakawa series? Yumi the demon one.
Uh,
I've forgotten the name of it.
the
Sugai.
Demon Realm, yes, yeah.
Yeah. That the new Arakawa series that's going to be an anime soon. And several interesting series, but this was the clear winner, and it is in English. The Summer Hikaru Died. Japanese title is Hikaru ga Shinda Natsu, which means, if you translate it, the summer Hikaru died. So this is a literal localization for once. And it's by a mangaka called Mokumokuren, which I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest is a pen name.
I would think so.
Not,
Yeah.
I would think so. Not much is known about Mokumokuren as far as I know, but this is their first manga, I believe, and it's published in English by Yen Press. It got an English licensing fairly early on because, frankly, almost from the first chapter, it was kind of a sensation in Japan. It got noticed immediately. This is one of those series where Samu and I were messaging each other on former Twitter, hey, I'm seeing this in bookshops. Do you know anything about this one? Everyone seems to be, this is getting popped up everywhere. Started getting nominated for awards. Definitely, it was a buzzy series right from the very beginning, which was in the summer of 2021. It's now on 5 volumes, and it's published in Japan in Young Ace Up. It's a seinen magazine. That's my home demographic, as you know. I tend to mostly favor series in that demographic, although I consider myself a generalist. But I didn't start reading it immediately. I wanted to let it build up a little bit of a chapter count. In fact, I didn't really end up reading it until we decided, or you decided, that we were going to cover it on the show. And interestingly, even though it's only on 5 chapters, it's already had an anime announcement as well. So that's pretty exciting. So Samu, you have been reading this almost since it began being serialized, yes?
Yeah, I was curious by its initial reception that it had, which, like you say, was mainly in Japan, but it was making waves online, especially the way that it was framed, which I think we'll probably dissect into further. And I don't know if
I
maybe it's totally accurate in what you expect when you initially read it. It was framed as this sort of BL mystery seinen series, this like mix of these demographics and genres. And yeah, I was curious about it, and I've been keeping up with it ever since. So
yeah.
yeah, and I always did feel like it was going to be a series that was up your alley. I gave some suggestions of what vibes it gave to me,
Hmm.
and yeah, I think that might circle back in our recommendations as well.
Yeah, I mean, spoiler, I think it's pretty great. A series has good buzz when it's only a couple years old and it's already got 4 actors that are listed as different people who have voiced the main characters, and each of the main characters has 4 actors who have already played them in the various visual comic promotions and previews for the comic and all this. So when it comes time to actually casting the anime, which I'm sure they've probably already done, but nothing has been announced yet, it'll be very interesting to see who they go with, because they've already had some pretty big names cast in the various previews for the manga, like Hiroshimono, who God I hope is not picked, Ken, Junya Inoki, uh, Tomoaki Maeno, Uchiyama Koki. So some big names have already played these roles in manga previews. So it'll be interesting to see where they go with the anime. But for now, we're going to talk about the manga. And it's currently on 28 chapters. So these are monthly. It's monthly chapters. So these are long chapters. Each chapter is about 35 pages on average, I think. Basically, I would describe it as kind of a timeless manga speculative fiction story. It's set in a small village up in the mountains. I think Higurashi kind of thing. Strange things going on in the village, but there are two main characters here, two boys who are in high school. I don't think their age has literally been given yet. I would put them probably around 16, maybe 15. Yoshiki and Hikaru. They've been friends really their whole lives. Hikaru, who belongs to one particular family that has a leadership role, well, a prominent role in the history of the village. He goes up into the mountains, in the forests up on the mountain, and he comes back different than how he was before. And we're going to have a non-spoiler and spoiler section, but Samu, I think it's pretty much okay to tell people the hook here, even in the non-spoiler section, right? Because it's pretty
I
much
mean,
obvious
it's
from the first couple of chapters. It's openly acknowledged.
for the first few pages. Yeah, it's hard to
Yeah.
ignore.
Yeah, so this is a spoiler, but it's only a spoiler if you haven't finished chapter frickin' 1. So I don't consider it much of a spoiler. So Hikaru comes back down the mountain having something has changed up there, and something has taken him over, and is now residing in his body. And the rest of the story, at least so far, is really a chain of events that spin off of that. And it's that and the strange history of this village and the villages it's surrounded, the emotional repercussions of what's happened to Hikaru. So as I said, it was the first ever Patreon poll winner, which I think that's important from the perspective that it shows that even a series that's relatively new, that's not by a famous mangaka, I think the people who take the time and the money to support LIA clearly have a pretty good literacy rate when it comes to manga. They know the shit that's going down. They follow. They're interested in what's making waves over here, even if it hasn't necessarily made waves in the English speaking world yet. I want to compare, if I can, the experience of kind of binging it, which I did over the course of a month or less, and having followed it for 3 years, as you have. Um, what's been your kind of like your bond with the series over the course of those 3 years? Has your view of it ebbed and flowed? Has it waxed and waned, or have you had a pretty consistent take on it right from the beginning?
I mean, the very nature of this series, I feel, is so elusive and ever changing. And I would say every volume or so, we get these revelations or something that reframes what we think about the story. Like, you have this mystery, which is about this starts off fairly simple with what is possessing Hikaru's body, which then unravels into this larger conspiracy that just keeps going and going. So it's, for me, reading it monthly or each chapter has come out, it's been unpredictable. I can't really foresee where I think it's been going, or even looking ahead now where I think it is going to go. I would say I was hooked most in the initial 2 volumes, when it did focus primarily on that relationship between Yoshiki and Hikaru. That is kind of coming back around again, I feel, in the latest chapters, as they were reading at the moment. So yeah, my feelings have kind of changed, not dramatically. I think I was really, really into it in the beginning, and then as it's explored all these other different avenues that have unfurled from this conspiracy plot, I've kind of been like curious, but it's also a wait and see how it's going to play out. Though I think the character stuff, the interactions, the arc of their relationship has still kept me hooked, like over the past 3 years that I've been reading it. So it's probably different than you, whereas you're just getting this all at once. Um,
Right.
so yeah, what's your
I
feeling been? What?
I would say I feel it's been remarkably consistent. It's easier when you binge something, but believe me, I've binged quite a few mangas in my life, not least a few for this show, and you do get waxes and wanes in your interest level. You do realize when mangas go through peak periods and valley periods, and I do think this one has been remarkably consistent. The tone has changed and the subject has changed, but on balance, I think it's been consistently engaging. Uh, to It's been consistently engaging, and it hasn't really. I haven't felt any part of it where I felt like, oh, okay, I'm drifting on this. It's always been very good from the beginning. And what's interesting to me, uh, we don't know, like I said, too much about Mokumokuren, but we know that they conceived this storyline um, before they were even in high school. So basically the premise was conceived when the writer was about 14 or 15 years old. Uh, General consensus is that Mokumokuren is probably only a high school graduate for in around 2020. So is probably based on their public comments. So they're probably only like 21, 22 right now. Um, I don't think one could almost compare. I want to think about something like the Ichinose family's deadly sins, um, which Taizan 5 is a similar mangaka in a way, but in that they a lot happens in a relatively short period of time. But what's interesting to me is Taizan series, both of them are all Takopi's Original Sin and then Ichinose Family's Deadly Sins. They're all about drama. Every chapter, every page, seemingly
High
there's some big
drama.
drama happen, and that's not how this series is. It's really, in a sense, almost like a slice of life. Even though there are occasionally some big events that go on here, um, and it does have consequence, and it does have a big overarching storyline, and we'll talk about a question I have about that in a little bit. But it's not like it's not a Taizan 5 style series where it's just drama, 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 drama. It really is mostly people talking to each other, mostly Yukari and Hikaru more than any other people, but other people
Mm.
too. So I think it really works in that extent. And there's another character in here, Kurabayashi-san, who's an older lady who ends up becoming an important character, who I think is a really fantastic character. I don't know how you feel about her, but I really like her. I think she's very interesting. She adds something totally different to the story.
Yeah, she is.
So I have just a total off the wall question I just feel like asking, and it's kind of a dangerous question, I suppose. But if you had to guess, just based on the manga, would you guess Mokumokuren is a man or a woman? What do you think?
I would hazard a guess and say a woman.
Me too.
Um, I mean, like you say, it seems like they are quite young, but they have done a couple of one shots or just little manga that they've posted online, which lean even more into the BL side than what we see here. And if
Mm,
I was just to be a betting man, I think it's much more likely that an author who publishes BL content is probably a woman. It's not unheard of that men can do it as well. Um, but that is, I think, and I think this type of story, this type of relationship that we have between Yoshiki and Hikaru, that I feel like maybe there is a woman's touch to it as well.
I agree. I agree with that completely, and I just was curious your take on it. I think the way she depicts the emotional exchanges between the characters, especially the two leads, it has more of a it feels like it comes from more of a female perspective on males, if you know what I'm saying.
Mm.
I think some ways women can be more perceptive about how men interact with each other than men are. And who
It's,
knows? Maybe the reverse is true too. I don't know, but
I mean, it's
I
definitely a
do.
different point of view, and there's other authors that I can think of where we don't necessarily know their gender, and it's not been revealed publicly. two even like Weekly Shonen Jump ones that come to mind is the mangaka of Demon Slayer as well as
Right.
Haikyuu. If I feel, I mean, maybe we shouldn't be speculating in the first place, but it seems to me that Demon Slayer mangaka is also a woman. That just feels
I
the hints
agree
that we've got.
completely.
And
Yeah,
I
I agree.
feel, and I've actually gone back and forth on Haikyuu as well on Furudate, just
Hmm.
because of author comments that I've seen about how it's a lot is directly coming from their high school volleyball experience,
Okay,
which is not
well,
to say that girls volleyball is a big thing as well. But I think maybe you've touched on it as well when you've reviewed it, that Haikyuu also did feel like maybe a series that had a woman's touch potentially.
I would have if I don't know anything about the author comments, but if you were just asking me based on having read some of the manga and watched all of the anime that's available, I would certainly have guessed it was a woman that wrote it. I think it bears a lot of commonalities with Ofuri, Okiku Furikabute, in some of the ways it depicts the characters, which is written by a woman. So again, not to say it couldn't be a guy, and it's not to say men can't write that sort of story, but just the emotional side of the story, it feels to me, IQ, like it's very much like it's written by a woman. But it's pure speculation, and that's not the series that we're here to talk about anyway. So we'll consider that one a sidetrack. So, um, okay, so let's talk about a couple of things. We won't get to the spoiler part immediately, but again, there is one main spoiler that's really revealed literally in the first chapter. So it's not uh, that's not a big spoiler. So we know from the beginning that Hikaru is something else. But we also know that Hikaru still has most of Hikaru's memories. So, and it's indisputably Hikaru's physical form. So, my question for you then is Hikaru still Hikaru or not? What do you think?
I think he's not, because there feels to be a hollowness, and I feel like there's this mirroring between the two characters and this sort of performance that's happening. And Hikaru and Yoshiki, they're they're both performing in different ways to other people. Hikaru quite literally embodying the body of this boy that he's possessed, or that it has possessed, and going about in which people maybe might not see the differences because it feels like it's doing the job so well. But then you have this one person who is seeing the differences that are cropping up, and Yoshiki himself is performing what in ways that he wants to hide his true self or true feelings to other people, and isn't entirely being authentic with himself or with his best friend. Yeah, I think that's really fascinating, and I think that at the core of it, it explores this idea of Hikaru. It's not Hikaru anymore. We've never really, apart from these flashbacks intermittently throughout the series, we don't really know him. Think we what who we know is this fake Hikaru, this second Hikaru, and seeing Yoshiki go on that journey of accepting that this is a different person, but also this complicated feeling he has where it looks like the exact same person, and he still has these feelings for who he was before, and it's carrying over. So, like, if it can be an entirely different person internally, but looks exactly the same and seems to perform in the same way, it's a strange way that examines how authentic his feelings are. And yeah, I think that is my favorite part of the series, seeing what Hikaru does with the body, as well as how Yoshiki is trying to accept within himself the differences that are occurring between who he thinks his best friend is and what he actually is.
Yeah, and I call him Hikar two. That's what I call him, Hikar one and Hikar two. But um, it's interesting because Hikar two himself, notes that he is aware that he has personality differences as a human, as a human analog or whatever he is. He has personality differences with the original kid that he's aware of. Like he likes to study, and the original Hikaru didn't, and things like that. So yeah, and there are other people who notice for various reasons that something might be off, but it's Yoshiki who notices because he knows Hikaru so intimately, that they're literally, that he's been his best friend since they were small kids, that he's the one who really sees immediately that something is different. I mean, like he's aware almost immediately that not just that he's had a tough time of it out there, are you okay? But he's immediately aware that this is not the same person, literally not the same person. So yeah, I do think that's an interesting. I do think that's an interesting part of the story is the Hikaru versus Hikaru in a way, as he even wrestles with his own identity, having an awareness of who the person was before he took over the body, but then also having an awareness that he's not that person, and how he manages, as an entity, if you will, to put those two things together. Um, so, how do you consider the relationship? I call the pre-MacGuffin relationship between the original Hikaru 1, and Yoshiki. Um, I will ask you. We know they were best friends. Do you think there was something more between them, before all this came down? And do you think it was mutual, or do you think it was one-sided if there was?
I think the original Hikaru, my take is the original Hikaru probably had no idea that Yoshiki had the feelings that he has for him. Um, One of the scenes I really love, which is so funny, is the one when they're talking about another boy or someone else, and they mention that or Yoshiki like casually mentions that he was gay. Um,
Mm,
I feel like as a way he was like feeling out the conversation, throwing something out there, and Hikaru, the old Hikaru, reacts in this completely nonchalant way of like, I think the translation I read was LGBT stuff. He and the face he made when he said that. I think there was just
mm,
a complete ignorance, maybe of anything to do with that, or maybe that Yoshiki, his best friend, could fall into that category and the feelings they had for him. So yeah, my feeling is that Hikaru, there was nothing between them. It was all internal, which is
mm,
what makes this almost reset of what the relationship and what Yoshiki can now do, because he can act in different ways, or he can project himself onto this other Hikaru, which I think there's almost maybe a safety for him, and he maybe can do more now with his friend that he wouldn't have done before if he hadn't noticed the change in him.
yeah. Do you
Did,
think?
did
Do you think maybe he's almost in a way he's even aware of this, that he's almost happy about it in a way, and that makes him feel
mm,
guilty that he is happy about it?
yeah, there's this strange
Because
complication of
yeah, it's more liberating for him now. He can be more open about this than he was when the real Hikaru was around. There's no question
especially
about it.
especially since the new Hikaru, the entity that is possessing him, seems to be void of these sorts of anything to do with like discrimination, or is able to accept ideas that are put to him. Like it's like a sponge. It's taking in everything that's
Right.
coming in, and as you say, it's got slightly different personality to the original Hikaru. So my reading has been that it's more quote unquote emotional as well, and Yoshiki has been more receptive to that, even though he has these complicated feelings of like, fuck, I'm in love with my best friend, but this thing isn't even my best friend anymore. So what am I in love with?
Right. And one of the things I think that we know about the original hero is that he was, in Yoshiki's view, a more serious person than the new Hikaru is. The new Hikaru is, his general default personality mode is kind of, frivolous, really. He's kind of a jokester. He
Quite
doesn't seem,
easygoing.
yeah. And the original Hikaru was apparently much more kind of a much more serious person, which I find that to be really interesting. Interestingly
What
enough, too. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to just to circle back to your question. What is your feeling on their pre MacGuffin relationship? Is it the same as mine, or is
I
it much different?
I think Yoshiki was in love with Hikaru, and Hikaru had no idea. In
Yeah.
fact, I think at some point there's even a reference to the fact that Hikaru was crushing on a girl, in
Mm.
town. So I think Yoshiki valued their friendship enough that he would never have admitted how he felt because he didn't want to risk it. which I have a suspicion is something a lot of homosexual people go through, of being really good friends with someone their own gender and then falling in love with them once they get to be a teenager, and then but never coming clean with that because they value the friendship enough that they don't want to put it at risk. Which
I think
obviously,
you're I think you're 100% correct.
that's
I
got
can
to
say
be, I don't have that experience myself, but that's got to be an incredibly hard thing to deal with, obviously.
and then as you
I
say,
would,
watching them develop their own relationships and their own girlfriends and things like that. That is a very
yeah,
real
and
thing.
yeah, like, Blue Flag definitely touches on that subject for sure, in a different way. So I was going to say, just popping into my head, do you happen to know Mokumokuren said what their favorite manga is? Do you happen to know what that is? Have you read that quote?
No, I haven't. Tell me.
Want to take a stab at it?
Is it going to be a BL series? Is it something completely
No,
different?
it's not, but it is one that I think has a similar kind of an aesthetic, if you will, and that's Tokyo Ghoul.
Oh, I see.
Which,
Okay.
yeah, and I didn't occur to me when I was reading it, but after I read that, I was like, yeah, I can definitely see that now. Um, uh, People don't realize that the original Tokyo Ghoul, the anime and the manga, are very different. Well, maybe people do realize it. In fact, it was pretty controversial, but
I think they realized in the
yeah,
second season.
yeah. Although, ironically, my favorite episode of the anime is an anime is the final episode of that season, which was completely anime original, just because I think it's one of the most beautiful and incredibly directed episodes of anime I've ever seen in my life. But a lot of manga readers hated it. But anyway, okay. So let's talk a little bit before we get into the spoiler section. Let's jump briefly briefly into the question of the anime, since we know it's coming. This is a rare case for us where we're talking about a manga where an anime has kind of just been announced. So you told me this, or you made me aware of it. I didn't even know. The manga, as if already been confirmed, it will be 10 volumes, correct?
Yeah, as of the time of us recording, it was only in the past few days that, with Volume 6 being released, I think there was some official confirmation that uh, there will be 10 volumes in the end. Yeah.
It's
So we're
very
about
interesting
halfway
that
through.
they know that. It's very interesting that the author knows that to that level of detail, how the story is going to pan out. Basically, 2 years or 3 years in advance from now. That's pretty confident.
Yeah,
Do you
usually you
think
get just a one volume warning.
Yeah, because you
Yeah.
never know. Well, these things are organic. In most cases, you never know. Something may come along that causes you to take a side trip, and the whole thing goes longer, or it goes faster. You just never know. So, do you think the anime will scoop the manga ending, or do you think the anime will just adapt like the first 5 volumes, and then if there's enough interest, they'll do another one after the manga's over?
Yeah, I feel it's
Because
going to
I get
be
the
the
impression that they know
latter.
the. I get the impression that they know the ending. I would guess if they know it's going to be 10 volumes, they probably know how it's going to end.
Hmm. I think it's going to be the latter of the two that you suggested. I feel it perfectly. If it's 10 volumes, that does align up with two 12 episode seasons. As you say, it probably will take another 2 or 3 years for even to conclude with four more volumes. And you got to factor in the production time for the rest of that second core if it was going to happen. So it's kind of a long term plan, but depending on when this initial adaptation does even start, that's kind of what I'm envisioning.
I think the fact that it was announced so quickly and leaked even more quickly is a sign of great confidence in the commercial viability of the material, which is a testament to the fact that it's been nominated for numerous awards and sold quite well, as a young manga. So that's not really surprising in that context. All right, let's jump into the spoiler section here, and with the contextualization that we're talking about spoilers for a manga that is literally half over. So we don't know how it's going to end. We only know what's going to happen up to this point. But we will talk about how we think it might end. And in any case, if you haven't read it, you would probably want to tune out at this point so you don't get spoiled, because there are a lot of developments that happen after the first chapter that I would consider spoilers too. So as I say, we're 28 chapters in, so we're basically going to talk about anything goes from 2 to 28 at this point. Okay, so how do you expect the story to play out, generally speaking? Give me a roadmap. How do you think it's going to play out in the second half?
I mean, like I said, it's from reading it from the beginning, it's so hard to even predict what's going to happen. I mean, if you think about if you just read chapter 1 or 2, or even the first volume, this what develops between there and now, it's unraveled in a way that is completely unexpected in some ways. So I feel like this development of the village as a whole and this conspiracy and learning a bit more of its history, that's going to keep unfurling. When I look at if I just look at it from the relationship of Hikaru and Yoshiki, I do feel like it is going to have somewhat of a tragic end. Regardless of, there's going to be some sort of melancholic, sad, tragic ending between them and their relationship. I feel like maybe there will be something, maybe more that blossoms between them, maybe on a more romantic level. I feel like the series has been inching towards that, especially in the past volume or so of chapters. Both of the characters being slightly more open and receptive to that idea with each other, even if there's Yoshiki's still kind of holding back. So I do think we're going to see that flourish and that be a big climactic moment, only for it to fall apart maybe as everything ties together. That's kind of how I see it happening.
Mm.
Yeah, do you have any thoughts, especially since it's fresh in your mind as well?
It could be. I think there's a couple different directions it could go. I think it could evolve primarily as a relationship series, as a story of their relationship and how it develops. Because as we've said, this Hikaru, he basically has no preconceptions when it comes to human behavior. I mean, he doesn't even really understand the importance of life versus death. To him, they're all just basically versions of the same thing. So his when it comes to something like romance or sexual orientation, he doesn't have any baggage at all because he's not human. The idea, uh, the question of I think there is part of him that feels this yearning coming from Yoshiki and sort of understands it in response to it. But I think that's coming from the human part that still remains, and kind of that's him with his lack of preconceptions, kind of merging with the memories of the person who was there before. Or I could see it developing into kind of almost like an action series, a Save the World series, because some of the things that have been talked about here with the holes between this world and the other world, and what the bad things that could happen. Right now, they're talking about the bad things that could happen around this area, but I think that could easily get expanded to the whole world being threatened. And I don't expect it to go that route, but it wouldn't entirely shock me if that became an element in the story.
I would hope
Um,
not, from my opinion.
I
But
would hope not, but
yeah, when I mentioned earlier about maybe my interest lulled after the first few volumes, that came more from that side of the story when the adults in the room are talking, the revelations about the village and these like outside forces coming in, and those things were kind of happening separately, though you could tell that everything was interconnected. It's not really until the recent chapters where you're seeing it come together more. Um,
mm,
so I think that part of the series is where I'm less invested in, and I think I've touched on it before. Series evolving into we have to save the world. Often it's just not my thing.
yes, I
So
know. That's why I mentioned it.
I've got my fingers crossed that it doesn't go that route, but I also can see why it might. Depending on if it goes beyond the village or it goes further, we'll see.
Well, I have to say that, broadly speaking, not getting into the whole idea of a save the world ending, but um, I do think that side of the story is well handled and really interesting. The whole dark history of the village, and the creepy factor, and the family shrine, and the heads, and I think that whole backstory is really clever and really interesting. I'm kind of a sucker for this old Japanese folkloric rural village weird shit going down stuff. I really enjoy it. And I think I even enjoy it to a certain extent when it's just pure pulp like Higurashi. When it's really done well like it is here, I particularly enjoy that. And
I don't think
I
it's
do
doing
think,
much for the reputation of the underpopulation and getting people back to the countryside.
well, well, no, and you can understand why. But I mean, it's yeah. I actually, it's as you mentioned that I don't want to get off on a whole tangent, but I think the decline, I think the population decline of rural Japan, I think on some kind of a psychological level, I think that's part of the reason why these stories exist and are so
Yeah,
popular in Japan. I really think that whole mindset is like that adds an air of tragedy and mystery to the real world of rural Japan, which is effectively dying anyway. So I think that is an interesting psychological aspect of it. But okay, another here's another thing. We know that the Indo family, Hikaru's family, is intrinsically involved at the very epicenter of the whole situation with this village and what's going on. In fact, to a certain extent, they're at fault for it, or at least that's one of the theories that's going around. And so in effect, this one village was five villages, and it was five villages as a kind of a way to try to fight this curse that the Indo family brought on. And a couple of the villages are now abandoned, but so there's that whole aspect. So we know Hikaru went up into the mountains by himself for some mysterious reason, and we know that he was the next generation of this family. We also know that his father is dead and died in an accident. And at one point, Yoshiki actually says, "Was it really an accident?" And we also know that Yoshiki was closer with Hikaru's father than he is with his own father. So that was clearly an important figure. How much do you think Hikaru knew about all the stuff that Hikaru and Yoshiki are just now finding out through their research and through Kurabayashi-san's knowledge? How much of that do you think the original boy knew when he went up to the mountains in the first place on that fateful day? How much of it do you think he was aware of?
I mean, now that I think on it, maybe he did know more than maybe we would expect in the beginning of the series. Just thinking about maybe the way there were differences in his personality and the way he was a bit more serious. Maybe there was something more to him keeping his own secrets, or that was his way of dealing with information that he had about his family
Mm.
that he never shared to Yoshiki. Because I feel like we don't see too much of the original Hikaru, and if that is the case, what I'm saying, I do think that adds an extra layer to his character that would flesh him out even further. What do
I
you
mean,
think? Do you think he knew?
I think I think it's pretty obvious at the very least that the people in this family are not proud of their history. That's for
No, yeah,
sure. It's not something that they would go out of their way to talk about for people that they cared about, that they wanted, whose opinions they cared about. And a lot of the adults in this village knew all this, but certainly Yoshiki knew nothing of it when the two of them were kids. So my guess, we'll find out at some point that Hikaru's father, maybe when he was 13 or 14, told him some or all of this. And he made a decision, Hikaru made a decision at that point not to tell Yoshiki about any of it. That's what I think.
yeah. I think there
I guess
maybe none of this never happened, but I think the inclusion of it would only benefit narratively and like the characterization of Hikaru.
Do you think we're going to get a long flashback at some point, an extended flashback of maybe a whole chapter or something of the original Hikaru? Do you think that might happen at some point?
Yeah, I feel like we might see his point of view of the final moments.
We saw that
Yeah,
briefly
we may
already, but it was very brief.
maybe they could expand on it further. Um, I think that's something that I can envision that happening as uh in the lead up to the conclusion.
Mm,
Whatever the outcome is for the being possessing Hikaru now, um,
mm.
if that does come to an end, then I can also see them mirroring the end of the original Hikaru on a visual way. I can envision that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to find out. Let's talk about a couple of specific events that I happen in more recent chapters that I think are interesting.
Okay.
So Kurabayashi-san, who we've talked about, she's an older lady who ends up sort of becoming like a mentor protector to Yoshiki and Hikaru. Yeah, she has a tragic history with her own family, with her own son specifically. We don't know all the details of it, but that clearly scarred her. She's one of these people that there are people in the village who can see and hear more than normal people, and she's clearly one of those people too. And so there's a point where she realizes what Hikaru is, or at least what he isn't, but she also sees him as a human being, as a child, and grows sympathetic towards him. There's a point where, in chapter 26 specifically, where he's sleeping, and he's come to her house without Yoshiki to get her advice on something, and he's sleeping, and she thinks to herself, I could end all this right now. Do I have a responsibility to do it? I could, whatever's in this body, I could drive it out. I have the ability to do that. We don't know exactly why or if that's true, but she thinks she does. Do you think she made the right decision or the wrong decision in letting her feelings stay her hand from doing that?
Well, there's a lot of characters in this series that are just a little bit weird and a little bit strange and off kilter, and
You
she's
think?
one of them as well. Yeah, even though she does have this motherly side to her, she is also one that when I'm reading her, I'm like, yeah, you're a weird one and you're hard to predict as well. Um, I think that scene in particular and what comes before it to build up to it is this sort of playing with that contrast of what she thinks and feels is the best thing that has to be done uh, to solve this problem, but also, like you say, the feelings with her son, lingering motherhood, the warmness she has to Hikaru as she sees him. I never expected her to do anything to do that in the first place. I think
No, I
just
didn't either.
the hint of it as it makes me think of a movie which I know you love very much. A very particular scene from Last Jedi. Yeah, that sort of I could end this moment right now, but pull my hand away at the last moment. But let's not go into too much of a tangent, otherwise this is going to be a 2 hour podcast.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so my last pre-recommendations question for you is going to be this. I have a very specific reason for asking this question. Do you think this is science fiction or fantasy? Which do you think this series is? I think one could easily make a case. It seems very obviously to be a fantasy. But I think events of the last few chapters, one could make a case that it's science fiction. I think you probably know what I'm driving at there. What do you think?
Well, there was
Then this is
the
purely theory at this point for us. So
yeah, but there was the mention of potential astronomical origins that
yes,
date back much further than the current story. I'm not opposed to that, but as you say, this just does feel like it's in the wheelhouse of supernatural fantasy.
okay,
So maybe it is going to be a case of it's still going to feel like a supernatural fantasy in the way that these things are playing out.
right, right,
Um,
right.
I don't. I'm not desperate for the series to expand further beyond. If there is some science fiction element, I don't want it to go too crazy and stray far away.
Hmm.
Uh, but the fact that it was even mentioned makes me think that maybe we're going to see more of that side
Yeah.
potentially.
So maybe that was a Chekhov's alien mention there. I mean, that's what we're really talking about here is the alien question, which based
Yes.
on the way that the phenomena are described, there's one particular character who is quite knowledgeable about this, who works for some mysterious company, and he has a hamster with a child's soul in it, and he's sort of like a plumber, if you will, to put this in underworld terms, the mob underworld, not the literal underworld. He's a fixer, and the way he frames events, the way he talks about things, and the history does at least suggest the possibility that this could be an alien situation. I would, if I was going to bet my money on it, my own money, I would bet against it being an alien situation. But I do think that's a very realistic possibility. I think that could absolutely happen.
I will say
And I wouldn't, it wouldn't
he's maybe
bother
the
me.
he's maybe the one character in the series that I'm just still not sure. I'm just still not sure of his inclusion. He's obviously this outsider, the way he's framed and the knowledge that he
Right.
has, but I just feel like he's just maybe a little bit too different tone. I don't know. There is something about him whenever he comes on the page. I've got a disconnect when it comes to him. That could change. Obviously, he's going to be much more directly involved, I feel, with Hikaru and Yoshiki going forward. Um,
Well, he's literally the only character in the story who's not from this village originally.
yeah,
Literally the only person we've ever met in the story who's not originally from this village. So, as far as I remember, at least, the only significant one. So
yeah.
it's not surprising that he would stick out in that way, I don't think.
I've got a
Um,
question for you as well, especially since you
sure.
are so fresh. And we're at the point where the chapters are at available in English. We're roughly like volume 5, volume 6 ish. Where do you think, if it is going to split into two cores, where do you see the ending being? If they are going to be, because I think we've probably just passed it roughly. Like maybe the beach scene. Does that feel like a moment that could?
Yeah, that could be absolutely that could be one possibility. Yeah, the beach scene could be a possibility. It depends on whether they want to go for kind of a reflective ending or whether they want to go for kind of a cliffhanger-ish ending. I think if they go with the beach scene, I think that really is more of like that's more of a thoughtful kind of a emotional ending, whereas they could go for something more of a traditional like core break, as we would say, but I don't see a logical, like from a plot standpoint, I don't see a plot milestone point where it's logical to do a cliffhanger ending. I don't think there's been one. So the beach scene, yeah, because I think that's kind of like the most important interactive scene between Yoshiki and Hikaru in the whole series, probably is the beach
Yeah.
scene. I think that's the closest that they come to really being completely honest with each other,
Hmm.
especially Yoshiki, because he's the one who I don't think Hikaru really holds any secrets. I think he just says whatever he feels because that's his nature. But I think Yoshiki, that's the closest he comes to revealing his true self to Hikaru. And in that sense, I do think it would be a logical place
And it could
to
do
pause it.
somewhat of a little cliffhanger with having, I've forgotten his name. What's his face? The outsider appearing on the beach and
I
being
forgot
like,
to, yeah.
um, I feel like they could do that as a cliff. It's not a super cliffhanger, but it's some sort of punch of an end of him introducing himself to them.
Yeah,
I just
I
asked
think
because
so. Yeah.
I couldn't think of many more places that the series could end recently.
Yeah, I mean, if they made a decision going in that they're going to finish it, I think there's less urgency to find a really conclusive place to pause it. And um, I suspect they'll go into this. It may be a split core with a 2 year break, but I suspect they're going to go into this thing knowing that they're going to do 2 seasons and they're going to finish it. I think the commitment to do that will probably be there in advance. I'd be
Hmm.
surprised if it wasn't. We've seen a lot of anime that have less commercial success than this manga has had already get sequels. Sequels are becoming more and more of a norm now in anime. So I would be shocked if it didn't get the second season. In which case, I think the urgency to find a logical quote unquote ending point is less. And I think that would be a good spot to do it. It's also the first time the series goes outside the village too, so I think that's kind of an interesting aspect of it too. And then something happens when they come back. They see something. That would be so. That's the reveal, really, of these strange things that they see in the sky. That
Oh
could
yeah,
be an
that could be as
interesting.
well.
Yeah, that like you could even pause like with her calling them up and saying like Kurabayashi-san actually calls Yoshiki on the phone and says, look up at the sky," and that would be a great place to end it. Actually, now that I think about it,
Yeah,
because
that could
that kind
happen
of
as
like
well.
asks all the questions and gives you no answers. It's like you don't know where it's going to go from there. Um, so all right, let's get into okay. So that's our rather long, but when we like a series, we do that. Let's get into the recommendation section. Since I know I'm not scooping you on your recommendation here, I'm going to feel confident in going first this one, but it is one you suggested to me originally you thought was a mood match, and I kind of agree with you, and that's Shiki. Um, I actually thought about Bokudake ga Inaimachi too, Erased, which I think has a lot of I think there's a vibe similarity there. I think there's some commonalities in the writing. I would have been very comfortable using that as a recommendation, but I already did use that for another series, so I'm not going to go back to the well again. Shiki is by Ono Fuyumi and Fujisaki Ryu, and it is based actually on a novel, not a light novel, an actual novel that Ono wrote. And it's a vampire story. It got an anime that ran for two cours on Noitamina, maybe 2013, 2014, I want to say. Um, we don't know how this series is going to end, but that one had the feeling of tragedy running through it. You kind of knew it wasn't going to end happily, and that's kind of how I feel about this one too, as you alluded to. And it really takes this position of looking at what are monsters and what are, they're actually the question of who's good and who's evil, and how the we would normally think of in a horror setting these creatures that we set as the monsters, as the villains, that they actually have a complicated story and their own motivations. And so there are not a lot of plot overlaps between Shiki and Hikaru, other than the fact that we have that small town Japanese setting. But I do think there is a very much of a vibe similarity. So I like that as an overlap. I think Shiki really works. I haven't read the novel actually, but the manga is, from what I understand, a pretty good and pretty faithful uh, rendition of the novel. And actually, I thought the anime was very good too, since we're on the subject. So I don't think it was a complete adaptation, but it did have an ending. So what is your pick for a recommendation here, Samu?
Yeah, before mine, yeah, Shiki, that was one that always stayed in my mind when I was reading the series, and it had a similar vibe. It will be, I'm curious to see if there is going to be as much of a shift in perspective and, changing point of views to reflect on a fuller story. In Hikaru, I wonder if we're going to get the same as what we got in Shiki.
That would
That's
be
one of the.
very interesting if that happened. Yeah, that would be very interesting.
My pick is two different series that are related to each other. They're called Stigmata, but then also Stigmata Love Bites. This is a series that started as seinen and then was reserialized as a sequel, remake, whatever you want to call it, in a BL magazine. And it has a similar dynamic to The Summer Hikaru Died, in that there's this romance building up between the two male lead characters. One of them is possessed with this monstrous ability in which he is able to sense the final moments of another person's death, and it plays out on his body and his memory and mind. So it's a detective series between these two main characters, one of them with this ability, which I think holds similarities to what we see with Yoshiki and Hikaru, and the feelings in that dynamic, and this sort of idea of a monster within the body. And also the fact that it balances this line between seinen and BL, even though BL kind of is sort of treated as a demographic in of itself with BL specific magazines. That is a series, and as is Hikaru, but is classified as seinen. But the content itself plays with BL tropes or that sort of examination of the characters. So yeah, that's my
Okay,
recommendation, which I think is
very
probably
interesting.
probably no one has heard of that series, but that's a little niche one to throw out.
All righty. No English license on that one, I assume.
There is actually, they're both
Oh, there is.
licensed
Oh, great.
by I think the website used to be called Futakiya, and then it got absorbed by Manga Planet. They do quite a lot of digital only BL translations.
Okay, and for the record, Shiki is not licensed in English, but you can watch the anime in English. Various places it is available. You can still find it.
And it's very
There's a
good.
torrent of options, and it is very good. And there's a torrent of options for watching it on in English with subtitles. Okay, now it's score time, and I'll let you go first here, Simon. What is your score out of 100? Your rating for Summer Hikaru Diet?
My score at the moment is 81. I
Okay.
would, there were parts of the series where I might have said maybe 84, 85 near the beginning, but as I've mentioned, it's kind of, not that I've disliked it, but the series is focused on the other storyline and other characters that I'm not super invested in. But it is coming back together, and things are also gonna, I have no idea how it's gonna play out from here. I don't foresee the rating dropping much, but yeah, 81 is a comfortable, very good rating on my side.
Okay. I give it an 88. I think it's one of the more interesting new manga I've read in the last couple of years. It has a really timeless quality to it. It really has just the overall feel of a really just a classic fantasy manga. A lot of interesting elements, a lot of demographic crossover stuff. The potential, who knows? I do think it's kind of interesting that a lot of times when we have a delta in our scores, I tend to be the one who's leaning more towards the really strongly character driven stuff, and you tend to be one who's more favorable to something that's kind of plot story centric.
Mm,
And I think to a certain extent that's kind of flipped here, which I think is kind of interesting.
yeah.
Although I would say I'm kind of equally invested in both. I think both the mystery and the relationship, I would say they interest me equally at this point, which is I think why my score is higher than yours.
And I will
But
say, for
anyway, so that's
even I was
mhm.
going to say, whenever since I've been reading the series, and I've mentioned it to you, I've always felt this. If there is such a thing as this is an Enzo series, this is one of those. This just feels like classic Enzo, ticks off the vibe check. So I'm not surprised that you really liked it.
Yeah, I do. It's 88 is a really good score. I mean, I still see some. There's just a few moments when I feel like I can feel the author's youth come through a little strongly, if that makes any sense. And then maybe knocks it down a couple of pegs. I think that maybe they're kind of losing authenticity a little bit by getting a little bit too aware of how clever they are, which I think you see happening more often with young mangaka than older ones. But that happens more rarely than not. It's not a big problem for me. Overall, I really like it. So that is our quite lengthy discussion of the summer Hikaru died. Uh, Hindaru Gashinda Natsu, anime coming 2025 sometime, manga already licensed. Just a really interesting series that's made a big impact very quickly, and I think with good reason. And one I think you're gonna. I think once it hits anime, I think it's gonna level up in popularity, and I hope it gets a really nice, really stylish adaptation because I think it needs one. I don't think it needs one in the same way something like Dan Da Dan needs one, but it does need one. I think it needs something that really looks nice and has a sense of style to it, and I hope that's what it gets. And that's our wrap up for today. So Samu, thank you very much as always for joining.
Thank you, thank you.
All right, and to all of our our listeners and viewers out there, I want to thank you as always. If you're checking us out on YouTube, let me tell you to please like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, even though we're headed into winter, stay frosty. Thanks a lot.